Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our event this afternoon, Researching Romany and Traveller Ancestors. So the event is broken down into 5 separate talks, and we have a number of speakers to delight you, starting with Sharon Heppel and Diane Sutton from the Romany and Traveller Family History Society. And you're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Okay, afternoon everybody. Unfortunately, I have the tail end of a cold, so I'm probably not going to talk as much as I normally would. Anybody who knows me knows that I talk a lot. Okay, we're going to do this in 2 parts. First of all, I'm going to do a very, very brief history, and then Sharon is going to take over and tell you about the important things, which is the sources that you can use. Who are the Gypsies? Where did they come from? Well, this map shows dates where there are references to gypsies basically going all across the world. You'll see that they start in northwest India round about 1,000 years ago and move their way westwards. A lot of them actually end up in the Americas. There were similarities between the Romany language and the languages of northwest India, and that helped scholars to trace the ethnic origins of the Gypsies. Also, as well, in recent times, DNA evidence has also shown that definitely they did come from northwest India. Now, their lifestyle was nomadic, but it wasn't just a lifestyle. Basically, they set out, and it's just been in their blood. They are just made to wander, to travel. When they first arrive in this country, if you think about it, people from India are going to have dark hair and a swarthy complexion. If you think about it, the only people who look like that the majority of people have ever seen will be pictures and paintings of the 3 wise men, who of course came from Egypt. So a lot of early on, people referred to them as Egyptians because they thought that was where they came from, because they obviously didn't know that actually their origin was in northwest India. And so Egyptian is the origin of the word gypsy and alternative spellings of gypsy. Now, there are also Scottish travellers and Irish travellers, or 2 different ethnic groups, each in their own right and with their own DNA. So Sharon and I are basically talking about Romany gypsies. We've already been talking about surnames here while we've been sitting here. It's just a few examples here. When they arrive in this country, Middle Ages, that's about the time that people need surnames. So the first time somebody in authority asked one of them what their name is, they chose a name that they had heard amongst the settled community. So this means that a lot of gypsies are called Boswell, but not everybody called Boswell is a gypsy, and the same with any of the other surnames. Now, one of the things that makes it helps when you're tracing them is that, as well as calling their children William and John and Mary, typical names, they were very keen on unusual forenames. There's just a few examples up here on the screen. In my particular family, Kisby is a favourite name which has been passed down the generations, and if you find a Kisby almost anywhere in the records, is going to be something to do with my family. Now, because they're moving around, they do moving around type occupations. So hawking, chair mending, grinding, peddler, making pegs and baskets and things to sell. Okay, tinker's an interesting one, because the tinker was the person who worked in white metal, tin, basically. Okay, which white metal doesn't need the amount of heat that blacksmith needs in the forge. So white metal, a tinsmith, a tinker, is something that is a movable occupation. The other thing as well is there is evidence of mobility. Even though a sojourner in records doesn't necessarily mean a gypsy, it does mean somebody who is moving around. Right, over to Sharon.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the presentation. I'm going to start by saying that our Family History Society Although we're concentrating today on Romany gypsies, some of the things I'm going to be telling you about are applicable also to people who were fairground and circus people, and any other form of traveller as well, particularly in these general family history sources I'm going to tell you about. But mainly I'm going to be talking about the experiences of our Romany ancestors. So you find that in the time of general registration, that births weren't always registered. Marriages were sometimes performed in church or registry offices, but not always. Deaths were usually recorded. If we move on to census returns, people who weren't living in houses weren't formally recorded before the 1861 census, but from 1871 onwards, they were meant to be fully recorded. And the reason for that is that the enumerators were told to count the number of travellers they found not living in houses, but not to actually add their personal details. And if you look at the 1939 register, then anyone living in a house or living in a van or a tent should be recorded. And the interesting thing is that if the individual said that they were travelling as part of their occupation, then the National Archives tell us that they probably will be their names will be written in red ink. That was because they would then be issued with a traveller ration book. If we move on to parish registers, you'll find that the majority of Romany gypsy children were baptised. That was because their parents thought it gave them a form of settlement in a particular parish. You'll find also that some Romany gypsy families always married in church, but there were a lot that didn't have that tradition. And virtually everyone was buried in the church or cemetery. You do hear of roadside burials in past centuries, but I believe those are very rare. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. You'll find that great Romany gypsy graves are often marked with large monuments, and that those graves are well tended and they're visited regularly by members of the family. Even going back over centuries, you'll find that even today, Romany people will know where their ancestors were buried and will make a point of going to those places and looking after the graves. There's been, I mean, we're talking here about settlement laws which apply to the whole of the population, but because Romans were obviously constantly on the move, they were more liable to be picked up under the Settlement Act of 1662 onwards, and therefore looking at settlement examinations and removal orders in the parish chest are a very good idea, because you do pick up a lot of gypsies being interrogated and a lot of their biographical details being recorded. And do also look at military service records. I mean, in earlier times, many Romany men at that period would be either volunteer or would be pressed into the militia. And in more modern times, you will find Romany men and women serving in the British Armed Forces, both in wartime and in peacetime. Next slide, please. So virtually from the moment that the Romany gypsies arrived in Britain, there was a lot of very severe legislation levelled at them. I think the first Egyptians Act, as it's called, was passed in 1530. And under that act, it was actually a capital crime even to be a gypsy, until that act was repealed in 1783. So you would have instances of people being arrested and executed simply because they were of the wrong race. moving on to the vagrancy records, again, this obviously were legislation which applied to everybody, but because Romany gypsies were on the move, they were more liable to be picked up because you could be arrested and fined or imprisoned for sleeping outdoors, not having any visible job, camping by roadsides, lighting fires, allowing your horses to stray, and even telling fortunes. Newspapers, you will find that there was as much media interest in past centuries about Romany gypsies as there is seems to be in the present times, and particularly Romany weddings and deaths and funerals always attracted a lot of interest, and so it's a very excellent source for looking for biographical information about your ancestors. And I understand that one of our fellow presenters will be covering newspapers in great detail a bit later on. Next slide, please. Right, now we're going to move on to the specialist family history societies, and you could be surprised at how many of them there are in Britain. I'm going to start at the top with 3 of the main collections of Romany history material that you'll find. The Gypsy Law Society archives at the University of Liverpool, and Katie and Luke are going to be talking about those later on. There is a major collection also at the University of Leeds, and there is the Robert Dawson Romany collection at the Museum of English Rural Life at the University of Reading. Now, all of these are open to family historians by appointments, and they're well worth a visit, but do start by having a look at their very detailed catalogues. Also important are peddlers and hawkers certificates, and I know that that's going to be covered a bit later by another speaker. Next slide, please. Right, there you will find a lot of material available to you free online, starting today if you'd like it. We mentioned the Gypsy Law Society just a minute ago, and they published a journal from 1888 to 1999 with some gaps in it, and you will find digitized versions of that whole range of journals on something called the happytrust.org website. You will also find a lot of free records on our own Family History Society website, and we'll be mentioning a few of those a bit later on. There is also a special, on Roots Chat, there's a special message board called Travelling People, where you can post messages about your ancestors or gain information. And just picking up at random, a very useful site. It's called Roma Heritage, and this gives you transcripts of parish register, census, and newspaper items. And on the site, there is an amazing mapping facility where if you find one baptism, say, of interest, you can then see other events that happened within a 5, 10, 25 mile area of that place. And you will also, if you go onto Facebook, you will find that there are quite a lot of groups these days where if you just search by Romany on the search mechanism, you'll find quite a lot of very good pages coming up where people publish photographs and information, and you can share information as well. Next slide, please. And just as a taster, here is a family tree from the Journal of the Gypsy Law Society. This one is actually my own family. They are Smiths from East Anglia. And this was published in 1910. And it was gathered by the people who compiled the tree from the gypsies themselves. And although there are lots of names, not very many dates, but I have found that it is remarkably accurate, considering that we're talking here about people who are living in the 1910, and here people who are born in the 18th century, and they're an oral society. They used to recite their genealogies to each other, and that is how they have remembered 150 years beyond their own time. Next slide, please. And the Society of Genealogists has published a book by me, which is a guide to researching your family tree, and that is available from the Society. Diane, over to you, if your voice is keeping up.
Right, okay. So our Family History Society is the only family history society of its kind in the world. We're into our 31st year, but we're not only for people with Romany Gypsy ancestors, but basically people who have got travelling ancestors of every kind, fairground, circus ancestors, and just as well people who don't necessarily have ancestors themselves, but are interested in these really, really interesting people. As I think we were saying just in the chat earlier, you get 4 very good printed journals each year. We've got lots of free records on our website. There's just a few examples mentioned there. We also offer a whole load of family tree books for a variety of surnames. Now, each of these books isn't the total family tree of the Burton family, for example. It's about a specific line in the Burton family. But as all of these families tend to intermarry, these books can be really, 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 really useful. And we offer a wide section of other publications. We're offering you if you're not a member already, we're offering you a special offer today. After this talk, you're going to get a handout which does have more details about this. The important thing is to choose the correct special offer on our membership page on the GemFair website, and to enter the code SOG 2025, basically to get these special prices. There's our website. Send us inquiries. We will attempt to answer your questions. And thank you for listening.
For our next session, I'd like to introduce Katie Hooper and Luke Boswell. Katie is the Special Collections Librarian at the University of Liverpool, and she's in conversation with Luke, who is a postgraduate student at Liverpool University. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you very much. We're delighted to be here. I'll give my own introduction first, then hand over to Luke, and we will pass the conversation between ourselves. So I'm Katie Hooper. I've been the Special Collections Librarian at the University of Liverpool for 35 years. And I've had the privilege in that time of working with many visiting Romany groups and making the GLS collections available for the community, particularly since 2008 and the Gypsy Romany and Traveller History Month, which is in June, of course, which is why we're all here. So the Gypsy Law Society archive, which we'll be talking about and talk about Luke's researches in it, does represent the collection methods and the attitudes of the original Gypsy Law Society. And that comes with issues as very neatly expressed by Luke, who talks about the problematic, romanticized, othered origins of a useful genealogical tool. So we are very conscious of where the material that we have has come from and how it got to be there. We're now exploring a new era of looking at co-curation and collaboration across our heritage collections with communities represented in the collections. And we're looking at new uses of museum and gallery spaces. And we are kicking off really with being able to work with Luke, who's giving us a really valuable new perspective on the collections. I'll let Luke introduce himself.
I'm Luke Boswell. I'm a Masters of Archives and Records Management student at the University of Liverpool. I'm currently conducting a dissertation into how the Gypsy Law Society collections at Liverpool can be made more accessible to the Romany community. My interest in the Masters originated from my dad's investigations into our own genealogy, which I've continued with. I was raised to be proud of being Romany, despite facing prejudice from others based on my identity during school, where to my knowledge, I was the only student of a Romany background there. To educate others, I want to shine a light on our history and preserve it. My dad has already taken a role in this by being credited in Viney Boswell's Trudgel Pedigree, which is published by the Romany and Traveller Family History Society. The Special Collections also possesses and uses this as a helpful genealogical aid when examining material in the reading room there. Before delving into the collections itself and my discoveries, I'll briefly give some of my background and family history as well, just to understand the context in which I viewed the collections. So my dad is Romany and my mum's a Garda, which means non-Romany. This provided me with insight from both inside and outside the community. Within the community, there's often a notion to not share information with outsiders for our own protection, but as the culture and history itself is at risk, I personally believe it needs preserving and also drawing attention to as well. In terms of my ancestry, I have Boswell and Boss ancestry, but I'm also descended from the Lovells, the Smiths, and the Herons, who also appear in the collection. My family traditionally travelled the Midlands, mostly in Derbyshire, and the North West, hawking wares, horse dealing, and making chairs and baskets. They also wintered in Heaton, Norris, and Stockport, and settled in houses sometime in the 1910s. We're not entirely sure about the date there, but the last recorded time in bardos or in caravans was in the 1901 census in Salford. I grew up with these oral histories of my family, of my great-granddad Billy owning and racing horses in Ashton Moss near Manchester, of my granddad Fred visiting his grandparents Aaron and Harriet, who had a bardo and horses in a field behind their house. This was presumably the same bardo Aaron's own parents, Moses and Elvira, had. Elvira was a Lovell who was a folk healer in the town we still live in now, and she made an impression in the local area and is still remembered today. It is said she used a doctor for her own health, was to keep appearances, said he came to her for advice, which I think is a great cover. As a Romany Gypsy myself, we are often relying on this ephemeral oral history, which is passed down through generations. So the Gypsy Law Society collections add an external layer of interactions with my ancestors, which I feel are quite significant to have a look at. In terms of what is present of my family in the Gypsy Law Society, they feature in Hall's pedigrees, George Hall being the man himself who tracked down my ancestors and interviewed them. He interviewed my ancestors, corresponded with them, and also in Scott McPhee's photographic collection, some of my ancestors' photographs were also taken. In George Borrow's Lavengro, Borrow being seen as a kind of progenitor of the studies forming the Gypsy Law Society as well, he's hypothesized to have based his character Mrs. Hearn from a great aunt of mine as well, Peggy Boss. The Gypsy Law Society holds this work as well, which I've yet to read, but I'm quite excited and nervous at the same time to do so. In exploring the collections, to me it's revealed that whilst the Gypsy Law Society romanticizes and treats my family and cousins as curiosities, as othered, the collections can also simultaneously be crucial genealogical tools, serving as connecting bridges between oral history and the physical records. And most importantly, it's open to the community ourselves as well. And now I'll leave Katie to talk you through the general characters in the Gypsy Law Society and the holdings there too.
Thank you very much, Luke. Yes, so it's going to be mentioned that the Gypsy Law Society archive collections sit within a kind of landscape within the UK of collections at Leeds, at Reading, related collections at Sheffield, also at Worcestershire County Museum, which has interesting collections there, and also Romany community collections, which have been built up. And the specific collection of Gypsy Law Society is very specific to its origins. It was a publishing society. It gathered material in order to publish in the Journal of the Gypsy Law Society. And that membership society gave it, I think, often a sense within itself, a sort of privileged mentality, being the sort of inner circle. And the power imbalances that were involved in collecting the material are very evident, particularly some of the language that has been mentioned. The very early days of the society, back into the late 19th century, following on from George Borrow, as Lucas mentioned, John Samson, Augustus John were early members. And some of the collecting practices and the problematic nature of those have been addressed in recent critical Romany studies articles, which I think are well worth a read. They have the major administrators in the society would be Scott McPhee, Robert Andrew Scott McPhee, and Dora Yates particularly. Dora Yates probably more involved than is made evident by the male editors that she's working with. Also important collections from the photographers Fred Shaw and Ivor Evans, and we have ongoing work in the archive now, looking to make available the really rich documentation that we have of what the, particularly the photographs represent, the sort of encounters. They're dated, they're placed, we know exactly who was there and where they were and when they were. And I think those are really important moments to be able to get back to what was actually happening at the time, rather than the interpretation, what was being said about it later. We're also working on statements which address some of the historical harms, and also the very negative presentations that come out of that material. Some of that has been mentioned and will be mentioned in later talks. And we're looking at using these materials to diversify some of the ways in which they're used within the university context. For example, in our English department, they run children's literature. We have a recent edition of material from Arthur Iverts, who was very instrumental in setting up traveller education services. He was involved with the Gypsy Law Society through his early dissertation work, and we can now use representation which is much more positive about Romany communities to give people doing those children's literature courses a better sense of the range of communities that might be represented in the literature. So they're characters themselves, the Gypsy Law Society, and in some ways they've been described as a rum lot, and the Society Archive documents as much really about the people who are putting it together, I think, as the people they thought they were encountering. And you'll come across some wonderful stories in the material about their expeditions to go out and meet people, and George Hall in particular, who's very, very persistent, and I think people sometimes got wind of the fact that he was on their tail and and made themselves scarce. It's a really interesting collection with lots of questions to be addressed, but we're very happy to be using our work with Luke to find out ways of making it useful and more widely accessible.
With the scope of the material in the collection as well, you just detailed that, what kind of access can the community have if they were to come into the archives, and what level of assistance as well can you provide to them?
Well, with the visits that we've had in the past, it's important to realise that Gypsy Law Society Archive is one of many collections that we have at the university. It's not our only one, so the staff are obviously resources are always limited. We do endeavour to make material as accessible as possible. Our catalogues are full and growing, and those can be searched sometimes on an individual name, which can be a useful way of being able to find your way through into materials that are most likely to be of use. As has been pointed out, there's a lot of the journal material is available online, digitized. We also have fragile material made available on microfilm, and of course there's always staff available if people are not used to working on microfilm, which I think has been often the case for people. So we have a read room which is open 4 days a week and can be booked. The website gives very detailed instructions on how to arrange a visit, how to let us know what you're interested in, and we will help you to navigate the catalogues. And if you find material that is likely to be of use, then there will be staff available to help you work on that in the reading room.
In looking at these collections as well with Katie's assistance and pointers too and helpful advice, I found that what was most relevant to the community is George Hall's papers and to Romany descendants as well, as it contains theorised family pedigrees, letters between Hall to the interviewees and those also affiliated with the Gypsy Law Society. In examining the papers, I found my direct Boswell-Boss family tree, as well as more information on great aunts and uncles' lines that I can cross-reference later with records suggested by the Romany Traveller and Family History Society too. Another illuminating resource was Scott McPhee's photographic collection, where I find a photo of my great-aunt Elderai, or Jane Boss, within this. She was an interview subject of Hall's, along with her son Lias, who penned letters to him. I don't have any other photos of my ancestors, not of Moses, Aaron, or Elvira, as they were either destroyed upon death or not taken at all. So despite the potentially exploitative conditions of the photographs, it is quite emotional to see a photo of my ancestor Elderai, who grew up travelling and stopping at Arachintans or stopping places, as it opens a window directly into the past. These photos are digitised by the special collections here and are actually available via the Finding aids where you can see them fully. with this as well, in terms of digitisation, are there any other plans to potentially digitise other material other than the photos, such as the family trees within the collection?
That's been a really interesting question, because the family tree, like the one that Sharon shared earlier, Luke has been able to identify a fairly small group of quite detailed family trees, which we could certainly look at. We have a new facility available to us now, the Digital Heritage Lab, so that we have the staff and the equipment to make material available digitally. And within looking at the ethics of digitisation, we would be keen to identify if there are specific detailed sources which it would be particularly useful to put up. We do have in the reading room all of the pedigree volumes mentioned, done by the Romany and Traveller Family History Society, and those have been based often on research, in our collections, and it's getting through the morass of people's notes, people's second guesses, the information people were given, to identify the sources which are full and accurate and would certainly be worth making available online.
That'd be really helpful for the community as well, just to know if their overarching family line is included in the collection beforehand. And when I was looking into these trees myself, I did find a few things to kind of flag to people who wanted to access the material. So I found the language quite confronting sometimes, such as using catch when searching for Romany subjects. Adding to this, I also encountered multiple notes trying to find my great-great-grandmother Tatian's address in Stockport. There's no record of her having known Hall or wanting to speak with him, so it seems a bit predatory, and the assumption that she would even want to speak to him there too. It shows how the Gypsy Law Society did see its subjects as objects to analyse, almost comparable to hunting down or a treasure hunt for new Romany people to speak to. It's also apparent that Hall was obsessed with skin colour and finding calo Romany, meaning darker skin, believing them to be more authentic than those whiter, almost equating those whiter to be mumpers, so not authentic Romany as well. Although this perception does exist in the community to an extent, I do wonder if perhaps this was reinforced by the Gypsy Law Society and the discussions that were had at the time. I also accessed the newspaper cuttings as well, which are integral to locating family. This is accessible via microfilm here, and it shows depictions of Romany in the media, which is quite negative, such as referring to them as invaders and rats, and this is back in the 1900s as well. One article even discusses an attack on some Boswells where they were injured by bricks, which were thrown to make them leave a specific area. Whilst it's very useful in presenting how attitudes towards us in the industrialising world started to change to be quite negative, and also it does focus on legislation blocking off action plans, which contributed to us settling in houses. It also sadly reflects that much hasn't changed today as well in terms of prejudice and the broad negative media representation that we still face today. So with this in mind and what people might find in the collections, do you think it's crucial to give warnings regarding the content of the collection as well?
Yes, absolutely, Luke, and that's something we're working on at the moment. We've done it with another group of related material, which relates particularly to Sinti groups in 1930s Germany. And again, it's really helpful to have community links in order to get that right, and also to point people to where other perspectives have been represented, like in the critical Romany studies.
For you looking into these collections as well, in regards to the disclaimers, I think a disclaimer also needs to be put in place regarding what is present in the collection too. There's the information itself gathered by Hall and some of the other Romany rows may be actually incorrect, or it can be conflated with others bearing a similar name over time as well. As surnames in the community are also adopted and changed over time, and numerous forenames or aliases were used by individuals, the collection should not be taken as entirely accurate, and it should be taken with a pinch of salt as well. For instance, one of my greats, Anslow Boss, was misidentified by Hall as the Flaming Tin Man described in Borrow's Lavengro. There are also multiple iterations of the same family tree found, with individuals removed and added over time in each different plan. It shows how info should be used in conjunction with other records as well, so not just relying on the Gypsy Law Site collection for your investigations. These changing surnames to, I think is quite interesting to discuss, as it's present within my own family itself. Some used Boss to begin with, presumably after using Boswell originally. I don't know the reasons for them changing this entirely. And then they reverted back to Boswell, which is why I'm a Boswell today and not a Boss. The Sheriff family as well married quite heavily into our family, to the point where they almost became Boswell, as the Sheriff surname is quite synonymous with Boswell, which you'll find in records too. They're often marrying a Boswell or affiliated in some way with the Boswell family. The same can be said for the Herons. And I've also found the Heron surname as Hearn and Herring in records as well, adding to this surname adaptation. The reasons for the changes that I can think of could range from evading discrimination in certain areas where the families got quite well known, to events involving courts, such as fines for trespassing or vagrancy as well. So they essentially changed their name to avoid having to pay that fine or potentially be arrested by the authorities. And of course, for other crimes as well in the areas, which may or may not have been committed by them. They also had Christian names as well, which were used for official records and the public. These cannot be found in Hall's papers mostly, as Hall mostly recorded their personal names as he used Romanas to speak to them. So they often volunteered the true names of the used between the families as well. For example, Eldorado Boss was Jane in official records. Station was Sarah or Letitia, and one of my greats, Moti, was officially Moses. So this makes it difficult to track down your family as you're unsure whether they are using, the Christian name or the Romany name, for example, in records sometimes. And of course, the surnames as well can change. Although this is the case, the alternating forenames as well can be quite good in assessing the family lines. So in my family, Salathiel or Salethian, Elderai and Cornelius are names that do pop up quite often, which can be associated with my specific line too. So that's a pointer if you're looking in records to see if these names do repeat themselves over the generations as well. And of course, you've also got to take into account family lines being lost due to immigration to the Americas or transportation to Australia or elsewhere, which warrants further investigations of convict records or records in America. I was actually lucky here to find within the GLS an interview with a lost potential great uncle or cousin called Newcombe Boss, who was transported to Australia. He provided an overview of his life in Australia with an interview with him, but also showed the destruction of his Romani pen or his cultural identity, as he was completely ripped away from anybody he knew and the culture itself. It is my theory as well that his family back in England changed their surname to Jones because of this event, to evade targeting themselves or to face, the talk within the community and outside associated with that. Overall, I'm glad that I found my direct family, my Boswell Boss family, in the collections, but a lot of my other greats, like the Lovels and Smiths, are not present in the collection. So it's integral that the community is aware that not every family is represented in the collection before going into it. And on that line to you, Katie, do you think these expectations can be managed in a certain way before accessing?
Yes, I think it's absolutely crucial that people engage with catalogues and the finding aids, and of course, if they contact us by email, we can help guide them through that. As Lucas said, his father worked with the Romany and Traveller Family History Society and the Viney Boswell. Boswell is a name that occurs throughout the archive, but they may not be the particular ones that you're looking for. So use all the clues that there are, and particularly where there are very specific locations being mentioned, because as has been said, people are often operating in a fairly sort of small circuit, and so you will be able to distinguish different branches of the family. So use all the information that the catalogues provide for you.
And in terms of the future and going forward at this collection, I'll be undertaking my dissertation for the next year as well, trying to make it more accessible and thinking of ideas there. So what do you think the collection has for the future years ahead? Do you think there's anything you have in mind to do with the collection, or anything you can think of happening?
Yes, I'm very much hoping that we will be able to do more community-oriented work. that we will be able to get the view of the people who were being collected, and to get their voices represented, and for them to feel that the collections are often very relevant, as you've found, and for them to feel that it is a place that they can come and do their own research, and indeed to help us see ways in which the collections could be made available, perhaps in locations outside Liverpool as well, to make that direct connection where people are. So that gives me a chance to say that we're just wrapping up now, and to thank Luke very much for his contribution to this, and wish you well your dissertation.
Thanks, Adrian. Thank you so much.
For our next session, I'd very much like to welcome Arantxa Barucha Enizaro, who is Senior Archivist at the National Fairground and Circus Archive. Welcome, Arantxa.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to talk today. For those of you who are not familiar with the archive, I'll start with an introduction. Throughout this presentation, I'll be using the term showmen to include men, women, and children. This is one of the most widely used terms in the fairground community, although of course other terms are also used. The National Fairground and Circus Archive is a research archive dedicated to the collection and preservation of travelling popular entertainment history in the United Kingdom. It's the only public repository in the UK collecting this type of material under the unified cultural identity of leisure history, the evolution of showmanship, and travelling show people as a defined community, characteristics which are key to the identity and meaning of the archive. The collection covers every aspect of travelling entertainment cultures, so far from the 17th century to the present day, although if early material arose, we would expand these parameters. It is represented by British and international companies, showmen and performers working and trading in the UK, and contextualizes the evolution, cross-cultural impact and spread of popular entertainment. The archive was born out of Professor Vanessa Tolmin's PhD research. This often happens in university settings. Research generates archives and other type of significant collections that at some point need a home. Professor Vanessa comes from a fairground family herself, so she understood the people, the history and the culture, and also importantly, she identified a gap in research and the historic recording of this cultural group. Her insight into the community facilitated not only her research, but also the collecting process that happened in parallel, because she gave this community, which has been silenced through history, a voice and validated their experiences, which encouraged the donation of personal and family archives. So I think it's fair to say that looking back to what she was doing, her work was rather pioneering. She was collecting hidden histories that came from the bottom up from a discriminated against cultural group. Anyway, at the end of her PhD, Professor Vanessa found that she had amassed a collection of archives that needed a home, but there was no appropriate public repository in which it could be placed. Some collections may have found a home in other archives, but they would have been divided across the country and collected based on values and related to their cultural identity, losing the connection to the environment and the roots and the community, and putting these important stories at risk of being lost forever. So in order to avoid the dispersion and the contextualization of the collections, Professor Vanessa, the Showmen's Guild of Great Britain, the Fairground Association of Great Britain, and other academics from the University of Sheffield formed a plan to establish the National Fairground Archive at the University Library, which was established in 1994. It wasn't until 2016, with the donation of the Circus Friends Association of Great Britain, that it became the National Fairground and Circus Archive. As you may have noticed, we don't collect the history of Romany or traveller communities. Our focus is on travelling popular entertainment and showmanship. However, there are, of course, many intersections as Romany and Travellers have been involved in the fairs and circuses, performance and showmanship. The most obvious domains in the past have been palm reading, boxing, commercial stores. A couple of the presenters have commented on tinkering and also chair making and basket making and things like that. And they sold those various products at the fairs. But there were also owners of rides and games and probably a wide range of other types of performances. And of course, there was always an intersection through marriage as well between Romany and showmen individuals. This is when the stories are collected by the archive, not by ethnicity, but by occupation. The issue we have is that many of these histories have been hidden or are hidden if they're not just the Romany related one, the showman related and performer related ones as well. If the showmen haven't identified themselves or the performers as Romany or travellers, we don't have a clear path to find out their ethnical background. This happens with many other ethnic groups, as I've mentioned, and we have maybe we have a name, but no more than that. And sometimes names can be aliases, can be changed or modified. You've already talked about that as well, previous presenters. So it's not easy to figure out. And this makes research in Romany and traveller family histories quite difficult and very time-consuming. Of course, if you have names, dates, and type of performance or business, it can make the search a lot easier. However, this is an under-researched field, I think, and we have to be realistic and accept that our efforts might not produce any results. Because in addition to the difficulties to find out information, another issue we face is that a lot of the history of popular entertainment has been lost, and mostly only the big names are fairly well documented. In part, this is due to the undervalue that has been put on this part of history in the past. Through current collecting practices, however, we are aiming at recording as much knowledge as possible from donors so that the collections become more discoverable and better understood and catalogued. As an example, we have recently acquired the collection of Rebecca Johnson, who you can see on this slide. She is a proud performer of mixed background, showman and gypsy. Together with her performing archive, we have recorded her family history through interviews to ensure that we bring her experiences and knowledge to the archive and her story as told by herself. This greatly enriches our records through the recording of intangible stories of her culture and oral traditions. Some of the issues that I've already mentioned regarding losing histories take me to the next point. The biggest risk to the preservation of travelling popular entertainment history is that a lot of material doesn't make it to the archive and is lost forever before we have the opportunity to preserve it. There are several factors affecting our collecting. Sometimes the historic value and relevance of the material is not appreciated and archives are disposed of. Also, transient communities are very self-protective because they have suffered a lot of discrimination and have a mistrust of traditional institutions. There is also a very strong tradition of passing archives down from generation to generation of families. And of course, they have a natural emotional connection to their family documents and personal papers. And we understand and are sympathetic with all of these issues. However, very often as archives pass down the family line, they start to lose meaning. The people in the documents become unfamiliar and nameless, and the documents start to lose value until they often they become meaningless to whoever owns them, and they get thrown away. Another issue we have is that a lot of this type of archive is very collectible and is in private hands and very difficult to come across. Financially, we cannot compete with private collectors who are willing to pay a lot of money for these items. So they become inaccessible to the public and researchers, and this is a barrier to exploring these stories. There are other difficulties to collecting from transient communities, for instance, the lack of a static geographical placement because they have to physically depart from the collections, and there isn't a sense of belonging to the archive as a place. The Fairground community especially has a strong tradition of passing memories down with the family, as I've mentioned, and they feel a need to keep those memories because they give them a sense of identity and belonging. We face difficulties collecting personal archives because they're not kept rigorously, and often items are discarded or hidden, and archival decisions are made outside the archive by non-experts before they get to us. So often we only get the surface of the archive, but not the really intricate layers. Collections often come to the archive after showmen have stopped travelling and become settled, and the link to the roots may have been lost. The lack of recording of the histories means that information, knowledge and stories have been lost as well, especially oral and cultural traditions. Collections are dispersed through family members or sold and become broken puzzles, which in means of archives become very bitty and complex to curate, requiring a lot of contextualization and research. So we face very specific and complex challenges to collecting and preservation, which doesn't help researchers, I'm afraid. We collect all types of documents, including business records of all kinds, manuscripts, photographs, printed materials such as posters, handbills, programs, newspapers, also voice recordings and film, anything that captures the history of the sector, really, whether that is the business, the personal lives of the showmen and performers, or the actual shows, exhibitions and fairs. We don't normally collect 3D objects, although we do have some in the collection. We make exceptions when objects are of a special significance to the archive they come with and can be used for public engagement. Of course, provided we can take care of them. For instance, we have been offered complete fairground rides in the past, but this is not something that we can bring to the archive. Collections that might help with family history are the World's Fair newspaper, which is the Fairground showman's newspaper. The newspaper has captured a lot of the history of the sector, which includes fairs, all the allied arts around them, circus, and variety and music halls, as well as details of the showmen's careers and personal lives, and commercial advertising as well. So it is a treasure trove for family historians, and it is really worth having a look at. Another collection of interest regarding genealogy is the John Turner database. John Turner was a researcher and author of the Dictionaries of British Circus Biographies, which is an invaluable source for researchers of Victorian and 20th century circus performers. He also created a database that can be accessed in our reading room, which enables quick searches of performers and provides citations of primary sources that have been used in his research. This has never been attempted by anyone else before, which makes it a unique resource. However, although very useful, it's not perfect. It has mistakes, and John knew that, so we cannot make it widely available online. Those were his personal wishes. The Archive Collections ledgers as well, and the Circus Family's research material in the Circus Friends Association collection also contain revealing information for anyone looking into family history. And of course, posters and programs can give away information on location, dates, and employment history of performers. Other significant collections are the John Bramwell Taylor, David Robinson, Bill Barnes and George Williams collections, which contain documents from the golden age of popular entertainment and all the exhibitions and shows that took place at the time. They are key to showing the evolution of popular entertainment and showcase the society of the time, their interest and culture. We also hold many important collections from ride and equipment manufacturing companies such as Orton and Spooner, Savage of Kings Lynn and WGH, which are prime examples of the application of engineering to entertainment and the impact of technology in the evolution of Fairground. And we hold the largest public circus collection in the UK from the Circus Friends Association collection and other important collections such as the Sanger collections, the Smart Family, Skin in the Cat and several others. The personal and family collections are also very valuable because they bring the direct and intimate perspective of the people in the sector. Significant ones are the Sheffield Bottom, the Marshall and Scott, the Barbara Patrick and the Harry Powler collection, among others. These are just some examples off the top of my head. There are many other collections which are also very interesting and important. Anyone can book an appointment to use the archives. And we publish all our catalogues online on our collections management system. We also have an online image bank with thousands of images, tens of thousands of images. And I don't know if we've got time. You've got the links there. I guess you can navigate it yourself. The website is very simple, only has a few pages, and it has links that you can go to find out how, for instance, how to request digital images from the collection or how to book the reading room as well. And the second link, you can go to our catalogue. We publish all our catalogues online, and you can search by name, you can search by type of performance, or by subject, and I think it's quite easy to navigate. And then in the digital collections as well, I think you can also enter search terms. It can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes if your search terms are very generic, like Fairground or circus. You're going to get thousands and thousands of results, and that can be a little bit overwhelming. So I do advise to use the filters to kind of manage those searches. And that's it from me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Aranta. That's very interesting, something that I knew nothing about. So opening my eyes, and I'm sure many others as well. Thank you. Our next session is being delivered by Natasha Kikas from Bedfordshire Archives. Peddlers, chimney sweeps and police records. Oh, that sounds very interesting, Natasha.
Well, I hope it is. So hopefully you'll learn a few things and people will have a few places to look. So I think that's me started. So hi, as has been said, my name's Natasha. I'm an archivist at Bedfordshire Archives, which is the county record office for Bedfordshire. Today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the selection of records which can help trace gypsies and travellers. In particular, these are peddlers' certificates, chimney sweep licenses, and police records. Now, firstly, I'm going to start with peddler certificates. Now, for some reason, it's not letting me go to the next page, which is fabulous. Let's see down here. There was always going to be one that could not
Absolutely, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Natasha, I think when I've done this before, I think when you're presenting in Zoom, the arrows are white in the bottom left corner. So I think because your background's white, you might not see them. So
yeah, I can't see that they were at all. They were, but it's all it's giving me is annotate, which is
Can you
and it
press
had it before.
enter? Can you press enter?
Enter. No.
Or the right or left hand button.
Done that.
Okay, let's just pause the recording again.
Right, I think we've fixed the problem, fingers crossed, and hopefully everyone has followed where we are. So I'm going to talk about, firstly, is going to be talking about peddlers. Now, a peddler was a person who traded by travelling on foot from town to town. And in 1871, the Peddlers Act provided legislation for this trade, which required peddlers to have certificates. Now, these certificates would last for about a year, and it would allow them to act as a peddler within the jurisdiction that it had been issued. This changed in 1881 so that it would cover anywhere in the UK. Now, this is an image from our book. We have 2 volumes of Peddlers' Registers of Certificates. Now, as I said, they would last for a whole year, and you would usually have to pay a small fee for these to be registered. They would be issued by the local police and would detail the person's name, their address, which was usually just the location, as you can see here, who would grant it, which was typically the chief constable or the superintendent, and any endorsements of convictions on the certificate. Also, if it was cancelled, or any fees. So we can see here we've got a nice list of names on one side, whereabouts that the certificate was being granted, the date and the expiration just here, and then the name of the person who granted it. So you could probably see a few names that you might recognise: Loveridge, Smith. This is a great example of being able to maybe find travellers and gypsies' names in places you wouldn't expect to. Now, what we have here, my next slide, is 2 examples that we believe we find in our registers, which specifically mention the travelling community. Most of them will say parish names of where they're staying, but these ones in particular are for Sheep Lane in Pottsgrove, and then in the brackets it's got travelling, and the other one, it doesn't issue a parish at all and just says travelling. Some other examples include no fixed abode or no address. So that might give you some idea of whether or not we think if they're part of the travelling community. Now, just because you had to have a license doesn't mean that people would generally get them. There's always those that maybe they'd resent paying it. Also, they just didn't bother. So here we have an example from our Quarter Sessions record. Now, this is for a gentleman who was called David Brown. He was trading as a petty chapman or a peddler in Luton without a licence. On this particular occasion, he violently resisted arrest and was sentenced to 2 months hard labour. This is part of our Quarter Sessions records, and we have a few examples of peddlers not actually paying their licence fees, and we'll have examples of this. Now, not all peddlers were gypsies and travellers, and not all gypsies and travellers were peddlers. There's been an overlap in their experiences, mainly due to the social prejudice that would come with it. A lot of people were suspicious of out-of-towners, so travellers who would come from town to town, door to door, were given a sense of had a sense of suspicion about them, and were probably quite unfairly treated. And these kinds of things would unfortunately become quite prejudiced. Now, these certificates and the legislation that brought them about is one of the ways that people can trace gypsies and travellers if they believe that they were peddlers. If they didn't have a licence, then maybe there is a note of it in the Quarter Sessions. It is still part of the law that peddlers still have to apply for a certificate, as you can see from this example at the government website. So this is still a piece of modern day legislation, and it's still in place today if people want to continue trading and selling from door to door. Now, the next occupation that I'm going to be looking at is that of the chimney sweep. This is again another occupation that required a license. So if you have any ancestors or descendants that you think may have been a chimney sweep or a part of that trade, it is possible that they may be listed in chimney sweep registers. A chimney sweep is someone who had to inspect and clean the chimneys. It was quite a risky job. It came with a lot of health risks. And unfortunately, they did suffer from poor ill health, as you can imagine, from the soot that they were taking on. Now, here is an example from our chimney sweeper licenses and our register. We have 2 of these volumes again, dating from 1876 to 1921. Now, if they wanted to do the job of chimney sweep, ideally they would obtain their license and they would be listed in the book as follows. It would state where they were abiding, what police station they applied to, the date and the license and expiry date, as you can see on the left-hand side. Now, the right-hand side of the register was for if they had anyone that was apprenticed to them or was a journeyman. So they might have either other members of the family that they would have with them as part of their chimney sweeps. They would have to put their information in as well, and also their age. Now, chimney sweep acts started to come into place so that there was legislation against using children. It was very, very common to use children, some as young as 4 and 6. They were obviously much smaller, could get up the chimney flumes and do what they considered a better clean. Even though the legislation came into place, children were still being used. A lot of people felt that children would do better jobs than a mechanical chimney sweep. So unfortunately, we do still have evidence of them, but a lot of people would take on apprentices, and this is where you may find again some instances of travellers and gypsies being noted. You can see on the left-hand side another nice list of people, and again you might be able to pick out a few names that you recognise, and it's a really good and valuable source. Now, the next thing that I'm going to talk about is probably the biggest collection that we have compared to the chimney sweep licenses and the Peddlers certificate registers, which amount to about 4 or 5 volumes. The next thing we'll talk to you about is police records. There's a whole wide example that you can find, whether it's quarter session records, petty sessions, reconnaissance, recognizances, settlements, or police and jail registers. Now, as I've mentioned, there has been some distrust and social prejudice against the traveller and gypsy community. Police would often assume criminality, and many different legislations that came into place would mainly criminalise their way of life. Unfortunately, this would mean that they would encounter the police. Some of those you might expect for reasons maybe such as stealing, arson. Other things, as has been spoken about, the Vagrancy Acts, was things such as begging. And it can be quite hard to read that someone in their lowest point when they're a vagrant or they're begging is being given 2 to 3 months hard labour for such a thing. But unfortunately, that is the case. Now, the jail registers are incredibly popular. They're a great source of being able to find quite a few characters, as you can imagine, but also lots of different people from various backgrounds. Now, at Bedfordshire Archives, we undertook a project where we put all of our jail registers onto a database and made it available for members of the public. Because obviously the registers were so well used, we had to preserve them, and we felt that this was the best way that we could do it. Now people can look up the names of people that they think may have maybe either got sent abroad, or if they were partaking in crimes. These things happen, and so there's a chance that they may be listed in there. Now, the jail registers will help people find their ancestors because they're pretty well detailed and they have a lot of really important information. If you're lucky, you may even get a photograph, which is fascinating. And I'm going to show you a few examples here on the next few slides. Now, the first one is going to be this gentleman here, John Dowling, aka Patrick O'Brien. It was important a lot of people would put the aliases on We have had incidences where people have got 5 or 6 different aliases and they're not very similar names. They will be completely different. So it is important that we've been able to trace all of that information. Now we can see here he is a 26-year-old gentleman. He is listed that he was born in Lincoln's Inn, London, but he was currently travelling with Myers Circus. Single, Roman Catholic, and he has quite some interesting marks and remarks on him. It says that he has the letter D on his left breast, eruptions on his shoulders. He also has an anchor, imperfect, on his left arm. And I believe it says that he also has blue ink around his ring finger. So he's quite a distinctive gentleman. It's quite a lot of information and a nice photograph of him. He was called in for this incident of stealing 5 shillings and 11 pence at St Paul's in Bedford. Down below, we have a list of his other previous convictions, and we can see here that he was also at Weedon military prison and Gosport military prison. One was for desertion, the other one was for insubordination. So this person has got quite a small amount of previous convictions. But on the next page, we have another gentleman. He is called Thomas William Marmon, also known as Smith, also Hookie. He is a 29-year-old gentleman. He was a hawker of books from Essex, but at the time he is noted as having no fixed place. This gentleman had quite distinct features, including a large burn mark inside his left leg above the ankle. He was humpbacked. He had lost his left arm above the elbow. He had a large scar on his right hand, and he had a slightly pock-marked face. For this instance, he broke 24 panes of glass at the Luton Union, and for that he was sentenced to 14 days hard labour. Now, when we look below at his previous convictions, you can see a quite nice list of places, and you can see his journey up and down the different counties in the UK. I'm quite impressed, if I'm honest. There's 2 incidences of him attempting to steal a boat, not once but twice. Oh no, stealing boots, that's the 3rd one. So I thought pretty impressive if I don't say so myself. But you can see that you have a nice little record of where he's been and what he's been up to. So these can be really important, being able to trace family members, maybe being able to trace different aliases, because if you have a suspicion of someone, you might be able to see if they're known as under any other name. It's quite common. There's a lot of prejudice in regards to the travelling and Gypsy community. So depending on who's asking them, depends on what name they're going to give. I have members in my family. My great-grandmother was a Irish traveller from Limerick, Connors. Unfortunately, it's an incredibly common name in Limerick, but depending on who asked her was depending on what name she would give. So it's not completely uncommon, and I have heard from others that this is quite a common thing for them to have multiple different names and not knowing which one was their actual name. Now, before I leave, I've got another example. This one is from the different end of the spectrum. So this is an example of Patrick Mernon. He is an Irish peddler, and this is an instance of him actually reporting a crime. He was travelling on the Boston van from Stotfold, and unfortunately some of his goods that he was peddling were stolen by 2 gentlemen, local men, James Burnett and Joseph Bailey. They were actually given hard labour for this, and they were sentenced and found guilty. But this is evidence showing that people, peddlers and also maybe members of the travelling community, were also victims of crime as well. And it's an important item and an important evidence showing that this person was able to get someone convicted stealing. Basically, he's trying to peddle his wares and he's getting his own goods stolen from him. Now, I hope that some of the records that I've looked at may give you an inkling of where you could maybe look at other county record offices. Up and down the country, there will be various places, various county record offices that may have examples such as the things that I've shown you. So if you know that maybe your family were more based in Kent or in Hertfordshire, then maybe contact the local county record office and see what kind of registers and what kind of things that they have in their collection. It's definitely something that we have continued to do, and we have recently updated our ethnic sources list in for Bedfordshire Archives. We have a lot of incidences in the parish records where we have people known as, well, they've been put down as Egyptians, but were known as Gypsies, being either buried or born in the local area. So hopefully, if you know of any ancestors that have taken on these occupations, you now have a place to kind of look and maybe do some searching and see if you can find any other members of your family, or see if they're detailed in places you didn't know that they would be. Thank you very much for having me.
And our final speaker of the day is Jen Baldwin, who's the research specialist at FindMyPast and looking at finding our ancestors in newspapers. Thanks very much, Jen.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And thanks for your patience. This has been a really fascinating session of talks, and I'm really delighted to be able to join you. I'm going to say good morning because it's 8:30 my time, but good afternoon to everybody else. So I'm going to start by admitting I'm certainly not an expert in this field, although I'm quite interested in the research of the Romany populations. I have one ancestor who is mentioned in newspapers in Ohio, actually in the United States, as being the treasurer and trusted advisor to a local family here in America that actually immigrated from England. So this has kind of been a point of fascination for me for a while since I found that particular reference. And so I've already learned a lot, and I hope that all of you have as well. I'm going to start with a bit of a content warning because, of course, we are talking about historical newspaper language today. And as all of our speakers have alluded to, this population was heavily discriminated against in a number of different ways. So while we know that newspaper content is incredibly valuable for populations like this, we need to also recognize that the language was used in the contemporary period is today can be considered offensive or harmful. So just using that thoughtfully, we're going to talk a lot actually in the next 15-20 minutes about language. That's specifically what I want to look at actually in the newspaper content. I think most of us are very aware that UK newspapers are incredibly important for our research, whether we're looking at particular populations or just in general. There's so much to be discovered. And we'll just start with just some basics, right? Of course, FindMyPast entered into a relationship with the British Library around 16 years ago almost now. We've just recently renewed that agreement, and we're very excited to be able to digitize their collection. Our original goal was 45,000 images, and as of late last week, I double checked, we're at 92.9 million, and we publish new newspapers every single week. So it's a really exciting initiative and something that as researchers, we all continue to have to go back to because there's new content being added all the time. My new favorite is one of the titles out of Ireland, which is the longest running published paper in the English spoken language. And it's just, the coverage is incredible. So just about any topic you want to research, you can find in, of course, newspaper content, right? Historic newspapers. Now, of course, many of you will know that FindMyPast actually has two newspaper platforms. The first is called the British Newspaper Archive, and then we have the newspapers on FindMyPast as well. We're going to focus today on FindMyPast. I know a lot of people have been using British Newspaper Archive or BNA for many years. So just to kind of spell out the difference, they both have different tools and features. BNA has this wonderful search by region feature on a map that I am a particular fan of. But FindMyPast has gone through a bit of an overhaul in the last couple of years. If you haven't used FindMyPast for newspapers in the last 18 to 24 months, you need to go back and look at it. I know I'm biased. I speak on behalf of the company, but I have never had so much ability to be savvy and intelligent with my searches and newspaper content before, and it's something I'm really excited about. So that's actually what we're going to talk about today. Both sites provide free newspaper content, but do require at least a free account. The reason behind the two sites is because the contract with the British Library actually requires us to have a separate website, the British Newspaper Archive, for the newspaper content. So that way they can reach the academic world, authors, press, etc. There's a ton of different people that use the BNA. The newspapers on FindMyPast, of course, then allow all of us, kind of our core audience of family historians, to utilize these papers in a very personal way, right? Finding them information about our ancestors, but then attaching it to your tree or downloading it or adding it to your family history, whatever you're working on. So we're really going to focus today on FindMyPast, but I do want to be very clear that both sites have access to the same collection with a couple of very small collections. There's less than 10 titles that are on BNA that are not on FindMyPast, but it's very minimal. They're small collections. And again, both have that free content. And you do need that free account, just to be really clear, but no payment transaction has to happen for you to access actually millions of free newspaper images. So the FindMyPast version of the search functionality has gone through some really significant changes, as I mentioned, and I think it allows for a much more nuanced approach, especially on topics that are so niche, such as the Romany community. So we're going to start digging into that. Now, most of our users simply do something like this, right? They enter in a name or a keyword and start that sometimes tedious task of going page by page, looking for something relevant to them. But there's a much smarter and efficient way to search newspaper content on the FindMyPast platform. We're going to start first with vocabulary, of course, because especially in areas where the terminology may have changed by region or by time period, or even by trends or fads, we need to know what we're looking for, and we need to know what those words mean in context. The other speakers have given numerous examples as to why this can be challenging, right? Various name uses, right? A version of a name in official records versus that in your family. A discrimination, lack of official records. So we need newspapers, but we need to use them intelligently. So let's look at vocabulary first. Now, I just pulled a handful of sources. The first being the New Partridge Dictionary of Slang and Unconventional English that gives a number of variations for the term gypsy. And by understanding these words, we're allowing ourselves to understand context. So words are very powerful, right? And they can be damaging and harmful. But if we make an effort to discover them in newspapers, we need to really understand the contemporary context for the period in which it was published. So these moments can be very difficult to research and hard to read, but it is necessary to understand what that source is really telling us, especially if we are generations away from that community. If you have a Romany individual or community in your family tree, but it's been 5 or 6 generations, you probably lost a lot of that meaning and context. Now, I also use online sources and a little bit of ChatGPT, just to be honest, to find other common historical terms and variants. And you're seeing, pretty large list on the screen, and I'm going to go through a couple others. And again, I'm not an expert, but I do know that there are a number of ways in which the Romany community has been referred to historically. So understanding that and actually listing it out for myself is the first approach I'm going to take. What words am I actually looking for in the newspapers? So some historical terms and variants, but then we also have, several others that are used later in 20th century newspaper coverage, or, for example, towards the bottom of the list, more in Irish traveller context, right? So we need to understand these distinctions and how they are used and where they are used in terms of geography and frequency. There's also phrases that can be used without directly using the word gypsy or Romany. We might see in newspapers living in a van, or camped on the common, or wandering folk. These are used, of course, to describe these populations without actually specifically calling out direct identifiers. So we need to be aware of these as well. Now, there's a number of other considerations to make, right? There's plenty of outdated terms. There's regional or localized terms, such the list of common names, family names that are well known. We've talked about the Boswells and the Smiths already today. we've talked about tinkers a little bit, but specifically tinkers of the glen, which is a Scottish phrase in particular, right? So all of these can really be built into our newspaper strategy. So these might appear in county or town level papers, but they might also appear on the national scale. Now, when we look at lists of words like this, it's helpful to know when they were used and how frequently they were used. Now, because I work for FindMyPast, I have access to a little hidden tool that unfortunately is not available to the public, but I wanted to show you just in a very visual sense how often these words are actually used year over year. So this is a comparison of the different spellings of gypsy. Now, as an American, I always spelled it with a Y, but this very clearly shows that in UK newspapers, the spelling with an I is much more common. If you look down at the bottom, we have a date range here from 1800 through 2010. And that peak, that green line, is the spelling with an I, with over 1.6 million entries in the newspaper collection as of last week. Now, again, as we add more content, this graph is going to change, right? So we can actually understand how frequent these words are in our newspaper content. We can do this again when we look at a different combination of words. So in this case, we're looking at traveller, gypsy with two spellings and other variations. And we see immediately that traveller is actually the most common. And Pavi, and I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing that correctly, actually comes in on the blue line, but there's a significant difference. Now, of course, we all know that traveller is used in a number of different contexts. It doesn't always refer to gypsies or Romanies, but we can understand that that's going to happen more commonly. So in this sense, what I'm going to take away is I'm actually not going to search newspapers for traveller because it's too heavily used. I'm going to use more specific terms and only use traveller as my fallback search term. One more graph to show you just because I think they're kind of neat. And we can also use this to kind of look at various phrases, right? So in this case, we're comparing gypsy encampment, camped on the common, wandering folk, etc. And camped on the common, of course, is the most frequent, but that also has military connotations, right? So we cannot just assume that this refers to gypsies, but we can use this as a starting point for our research, or as I mentioned just previously, a place to kind of define, this is the line. I'm gonna search for wandering folk before I search for camped on the common. So what do we learn from these wonderful charts and all these colored lines? Well, we learn that traveller is the most commonly used term, as I've already mentioned. Gypsy, it outperforms gypsy with a Y. Camped on the common, ancient race are more frequent, but wandering folk is more likely to be accurate in terms of researching this population, if not as common. So there's some very, decisions we can make in terms of how we progress our research. The question, of course, is how do we apply this? Now, I have access to this fancy tool that allows me to have all these pretty graphs, but what I want to show you is how you can actually do this kind of analysis for yourself. It's not exactly the same. It won't give you the pretty graphs, but it will give you the frequency of terminology based on location and time frame. And we're going to do that using the FindMyPast search tool. We're going to use the advanced search filters and the date filters to actually kind of build this for ourselves. So if you start on the FindMyPast homepage for newspapers, it looks like this. But what we're going to do is actually ignore this search box completely, and we're going to go straight to advanced search. Now, as I've been using these new tools, I have found that I pretty much do this every time, no matter what I'm searching for. Almost always go directly to advanced search now. So you may find that you also get into that habit. Now, on the advanced search page, there's a number of different filters. I want you to specifically look at the phrases. So let me stop there for just a second. Phrases, because this is a relatively new search capability, I want to explain really quickly. Phrases allow us to search a number of words combined. So in typical environments and many search experiences that I've had, right, you search on a newspaper platform and you say, the Wiltshire Battalion, and that's what you want to look for. And the newspaper search comes back and there's Wiltshire in an article on page 1, column 3, and there's battalion in an article on page 1, column 5, and they're completely unrelated, but because they're on the same page of print, they came back as a search result. The phrase search on FindMyPast allows you to completely get rid of all of that. It allows you to search for words up to 8 words long, a phrase up to 8 words long, that are all next to each other and with each other in the same format, context, sentence. So in this case, I have camped on the common with a phrase flexibility of 2. So it could say camped on the common in winter, right? And it would come back with that search. It no longer produces those random searches where you're getting one result on one page and the next result 17 articles later. Let me show you a quick example. So in this case, this is my camped on the common phrase with a phrase flexibility of 2 words. So that could be John was found camped with friends on the common, right? Because camped and on the common are 2 words away from each other. But if we look at it, oh, oops, I have arrows. If we look at it with a phrase flexibility of 0, which is essentially an exact search for that phrase on camped on the common, we get a much smaller amount of results, right? So in the first example, we have 18,000 results down in the bottom right-hand corner. When we say 0 phrase flexibility, we get 8,300 results. So it's a significant difference, right? We've dropped 10,000 results, which allows us to be much more exact and precise in our search capability. Now, of course, you can do this for any phrase or any population or any search, but in this case, today's example happens to be around Romneys. So when we look at the search functionality itself, we can also add additional phrases. So we have camped on the common, but then we added the term gypsy, and now we have 581 results. If we add the term traveler, we get 1,500 results. So you can see how you can play with these and adjust that phrase flexibility and adjust the number of phrases you have searching for in one go to really refine your results. There is no limit on the number of phrases you can add. I have had searches where I've had 12 or 13 phrases at the same time, which sounds like a lot, but I was looking for something very specific. So it really went down that rabbit hole. And then from here, of course, you can add any of the other filters like the dates or the name of the publication or the county or any of that to, again, further bring this down. Now, if you wanted to add dates, it's actually just underneath this on the advanced search screen. And you can add the custom date. So you could say very specific range of, a week or 3 years, or you can search by half century and then by decade. This is very easy to add on because it's just underneath the phrase searching in the advanced search platform. But I actually prefer to go to the search results page for the date step. So let me show you why that is. When you do your search results, right, this is what it looks like. So up at the top, I have camped on the common and traveler as my 2 phrases within 8 words. And then there's a date published drop-down menu. If I click on that, I can now filter, of course, in any way I want right here, right, from county to place of publication, et cetera, et cetera. But when you click on the date published drop-down menu, you actually get a view that shows you how many search results are within each date range. So what I'm really trying to determine is when newspapers use certain words, right? Because we talked about vocabulary and how they change over time. So I can really conduct a refined and knowledgeable search based on the data behind the newspaper archive. So in this view, you can see how many papers in each 50-year span uses the combination of phrases camped on the common and traveler. Of course, you can continue to explore other terms and phrases, or you can filter by a more refined date or a particular county or even a particular newspaper title. But right away, I can tell from 1850 to 1899 is the most popular use of these 2 phrases together with 630 results, right? And then 1950 to 1999, it kind of peaks again with 500 results. So I know that for this particular combination of phrases, I want that 1850 to 1899 range. If I want 1800 to 1849, I need to change my search terms a little bit to get the most out of the archive that I can. So let's do this a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and select the 1850 to 1899 filter. It's the most frequent decade, of course, or half century rather. And then it gives me further refinement. So now it lists it by decade, and I can see that 1890 to 1899 is the most common decade in which these phrases are used, and perhaps we're particularly interested in Yorkshire, so we need to add that as well. And we can do that with the county of publication filter just to the left of your screen. And that's what that looks like. The drop-down menu gives you this example, and again, gives you the number of results by county. So Yorkshire has 45, Wexford has 1, right? Sussex has 6. Those are the search results coming back with your particular search. So now we've got our filter set up. We have Yorkshire from 1850 to 1899, and then again narrowed down. If we would like to an additional decade, we're going to go 1880 to 1889 with 18 results, and then we get our list of search results that we can now explore. And we can also do this in a slightly different way, examining the search results first and then making adjustments. So let's say that we keep our Yorkshire from 1850 to 1889, and then just searched on camped on the common, right? That gives us 1,100 results, just over. But more than that, the top finds appear to be military in theme, right? They're talking about soldiers and regiments. So not travelers, which is not what we want. So we need to take that out, right? We don't want military articles. We want other populations. Oh, I had a circle, sorry. So we go back to our phrase searching, and we can actually add a phrase and exclude particular words. So in this case, we're going to exclude the word regiment. We're going to go to, and that takes us to 716 results. If we adjust that phrase flexibility again down to 0, so it's an exact search on camped on the common, then and excluding regiment, now we're down to 113 results just in Yorkshire. So if we go back into the advanced search and play around with this and move that sliding scale and adjust our search terms, we can really get down to a very specific set of results in newspaper content. Now, results, of course, are going to be vast and varied, but most are going, of course, to be negative of this population. Police reports, complaints, recounted stories that place the community kind of as the bad guy, the unintelligent character, the criminal. Now, other speakers have said, yes, there are lots of accounts of weddings and family events. That's also very true, but be prepared to read some pretty negative content. So we want to make sure that we're researching with care and with the appropriate consideration of that. So there's a few just kind of main takeaways I haven't really talked about, but I think are probably in all of our minds that just to say out loud, right? Newspapers reflect the bias of their time. Most are written from a different perspective and reinforce stereotypes. Editors and publishers shape narratives. They have a completely different motivation, right? Headlines sell papers, and we need to remember that no matter what topic we're researching. So political, commercial, sensational interests of those newspaper owners will impact the content that we find. The absence of voice is significant, right? Articles rarely include the perspective of those individuals themselves. So the newspapers are talking about them or for them, not with their input included. And of course, sensationalism, right? That sold papers. That's the whole point, is to make money. So these are exotic and unusual communities. They're often exaggerated and distorted. A couple more: spelling and terminology varies widely, as we've already seen a little bit, right? The idea of different variations of spelling of the same words is something we need to consider. Language can be coded. So terms like vagrant, nomad, twin dollar, they could mask anti-Romany sentiments, racism, discrimination of all kinds. And that's true for other populations as well. Context, of course, always matters. You need to read the entire article. You need to, in theory, read the entire paper, but you need to be thinking about broader social, legal, economic context in which that report was written. And of course, use caution when quoting, right? If you include that historical language in your own writing, consider framing those or adding some kind of a content warning or footnotes. Now, this is a short summary. I hope it has been helpful. The phrase search capability is actually really, really powerful, and it's a fantastic way to delve into this research. If you have questions or concerns, you can reach us, of course, on a variety of channels, and we're always happy to support and help. And if you have specific questions about this, you can actually tell the customer support people, I watched this webinar with Jen Baldwin, and they will direct your query straight to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jen.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Well, on behalf of all of the participants, I'd like to say thank you very much. We've had some fantastic talks today. We've got quite a few questions, so I'll crack on with it. So in order of the talks, I think I've done this. I'll start with Sharon and Diane from the Romany and Traveller Family History Society. We have a couple here for you. Now, the first one is, somebody's ancestors describe themselves as hawkers or peddlers or brush sellers, medicine sellers, herb sellers, and teeth pullers. Are they certainly travellers or gypsies? No, I can see Diane shaking her head.
You need other clues as well.
Yeah.
Basically, you've got to put together kind of the combination of factors about somebody to make that decision. Sharon, do you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, I mean, what basically, as one of our slides showed, you need, excuse me, you need a typical Romany Gypsy surname, ideally some children or the parents who have unusual forenames, and you need to have evidence of mobility in a record, such as no fixed abode, wanderer, stroller, that kind of thing. So ideally you need to find all those 4 elements in one individual. Yeah, someone's obviously calling themselves a hawker or peddler is a good start, and that's something that Romany Gypsies would follow. Teeth pullers, I don't think I've heard that one associated with Romanies before, but yeah, try and find 4 elements before you decide definitely that that person is a Romany Gypsy.
Great, thank you very much for that. Now the next comment was kind of covered in Jen's slide, but it was addressed to you, so I thought I'd mention it. They've heard that gypsy is an undesirable term and a racial slur, and that the Roma prefer Romany. Is that correct?
Well, I'm going to jump in and then let Sharon come in there as well. What my first reaction to that was, ask Luke. What does he prefer to be known as?
Well, I think it depends on the family specifically, really. I mean, we call ourselves Romany Gypsies or just Gypsies. But I do know that it depends on the group too. So in the UK, we don't necessarily have an issue with the word gypsy, but on the mainland, that would be considered a slur there, and Roma would be the appropriate term, for the groups in the mainland. So I think the rule really is to ask the person before. I mean, some people I know, some of my cousins just say travellers. So it really just depend on who you're talking to there as well.
Can I also come back there and add as well that when you write down gypsy, it should have a capital G. You wouldn't write down that somebody was an Indian with a small I. So when you write that gypsy, it should be written with a capital G. And traveller as well, when you're using traveller as a term, in the same way as well.
Great. Yep, that addresses that point. Did you have anything to add to that, Sharon?
Only that I've always gone by, I'm the editor of the journal, and I always have gone by how the late Gordon Boswell, who had the Romany Museum at Spalding, he always called himself, I'm a Romany Gypsy, and I've always used that combination of the two ever since. So I'm talking about 30 odd years now. So.
Great. And this next question was actually addressed in the chat, but I'm just going to reiterate what your answer was for those who haven't had a chance to read the chat. So we were asked, could Sharon and Diane please remind us about the special offer today for the attendees of this talk? Sorry, I've just clicked to admit Aransna back in, to join the Romany and Traveller Family History Society. But as you mentioned in the chat, thank you very much. It is on the handout for this talk. So when all of the participants, you'll receive an email probably tomorrow afternoon with a link to the recording and all of the handouts shared by all of our speakers today. And in Sharon and Diane's handout, there will be information there about how to get the special offer on joining the Family History Society. So thank you very much, Sharon and Diane. I'm now going to move on to Katie and Luke. Again, thank you so much for your talk. It was fascinating. Thank you for sharing. The main point that a couple of people have asked is, when is your dissertation due to be finished, Luke? And how can we access it? Because it sounds amazing. So will it be published for people to get their hands on?
Right now, I have no clue in regards to that question. It's still at the very beginning stage of research and getting my questions sorted out, and comparisons as well for the dissertation. So I can definitely get back in contact with the societies at a later date when I do have that more information. But right now, I couldn't say, to be honest.
Brilliant, no problem
Next
at all.
year.
Well, I'd like to wish you the best of luck with that, and we will be be keeping our eyes peeled for it. Are you on social media at all? I wonder if people could follow you on social media to maybe keep abreast of your news.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm also on Instagram as well. So I can put that in the chat just towards the end if anyone wants to link with me.
Perfect. That sounds great. And we have one more question for Katie and Luke. Are there any Romany or Traveller families in Wiltshire?
Well, that's a very good question, which I think probably our catalogue and finding aids would answer. I'm sure there are. I can't produce names off the top of my head, but it's one of the instances where the fact that we've got really good data from things like photographs, so you could search for Wiltshire as a term or search for specific locations within it, and I'm sure it would lead you to some results.
I think one of my Smith lines was from, I don't know if it's Trowbridge, in Wiltshire area, I think. So I know there are Smiths in that area, but I don't know much myself about that. Maybe Sharon and Diane might know more specifics.
Well, I mean, West Country surnames, you find Orchard, Buckland, Smith, as Luke was saying. But there are dozens of ones that people, because they tended to, rather than just being in Wiltshire, they would travel west and east across the southern counties, probably, of Britain. So you're going to pick them up in other counties as well.
Also as well, Wiltshire, very close to Stow-on-the-Wold. Stow was one of the two big horse fairs as well. You've got Appleby up north and you've got Stow kind of, down south. So you will get people from the West Country and, kind of across the Midlands as well, going to Stow Fair as well.
That makes a lot of sense, Diane. Yes, thank you. That's a really good point. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much to Katie and Luke. Let's move on now. Thank you for coming back in, Arantxa. I'm not sure what happened there. Apologies about that. So I have a couple of questions for you. Now, this first question I think may have been posted, but I think you answered it. Would there ever be fortune telling at the fairs? And I think I may have heard you mention it. Oh, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, my laptop has died and I've had to quickly go on my phone. So I'm on my phone right now.
Oh, no. We can't
So,
see you, but we can hear you. Oh, now I've lost your...
If I do the voice, I can't, you can't see me.
That's
and if
fine.
you can't see me, you can't hear me. So sorry, say that again. Is it about palm reading?
Yeah, well, fortune telling.
Fortune telling. Well, it did happen in the fairgrounds. I don't think we've got a huge amount about it necessarily, but you can see it on some photographs. I think it was the Hoppings specifically was famed for having loads of side shows or side entertainments, and it still is, and you can still find palm reading in the Hoppings and several other fairs, but kind of they tend to be the larger ones. So it's kind of not so much documented as such, but you can still find traces of it. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. And one more for you. Do Fairground families themselves take an interest, an active interest in your archive?
They do. We've got some collections from some Fairground families. We hold the Showman's Guild of Great Britain archive. We've got, as I said, other Fairground family archives. They tend to be small collections, because, as I've mentioned in my presentation, they often get split into different members of the family. And we sometimes get requests from them for information, for images. It tends to be a lot of online use because they are spread across the country, of course, and it's just not so easy to just, come to Sheffield. We don't really have an efficient way to know who's using the collections. In means of numbers, yeah, we can tell this many people have used the collections, this year or whatever. But we don't have a way of knowing who they are. So we know that we've got to start collecting better data about our users to be able to understand them better, unless it's direct requests, direct inquiries. It's difficult to know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess they are not a primary user, in spite of the collection being kind of about their history and so on. They are not our primary user.
Interesting. Okay, thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to move on to Natasha. So we have a couple here for you. First of all, I think you kind of answered this. Were travellers and hawkers certificated before 1871?
Well, the example that I showed you with the Daniel Brown, who didn't have a license and resisted arrest, that was from 1839. So it was required that they did have a license, but there wasn't official legislation in place until 1871 and then 1881.
Yeah, okay. So the legislation came in later, but it was still kind of a process that was happening before that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Because this person, their Cohen family were traveling around the fairs in the 18th century, and probably before that. So it's certainly worth their while then perhaps having a look to see if there are any certificates for their ancestors.
Yeah, it's always worth looking. Unfortunately, with all archives, it is whether things have survived.
Yeah.
And then if they have survived, if they've then been catalogued. So it's always worth looking and contacting the local county record office that you want to start with, and then you could maybe broaden your search from there.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of addresses the next question, which again, you did kind of cover in the talk. Have the Peddler and Chimney Sweeper registers been transcribed, and would other county archives have similar records? And I think your point is you need to contact the local records office and you need to find out what they hold, whether they've been transcribed, because each county is going to be different to the next.
Yeah, definitely. Each county will be different to the next. Ours aren't transcribed, but that's because it's just 4 volumes. So if someone was to request it, it'd be a relatively easy document production for them to look through, and there's an index to it as well. So it's quite an easy search. Again, it's just if the records have survived and if the county record office have got them catalogued and have an accessible online database, which you hopefully will then be able to find them there.
Yeah. And as we all know, the different county archives websites vary greatly in how user-friendly they are. So hopefully you're living in an area or researching an area that has a very good catalogue online for the record office.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of databases are transferring over to different systems. So unfortunately, some archive databases are not as user friendly as others, and there's
Yeah.
kind of like a switch at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah. And finally, how do you access those registers? Did you say, were they catalogued as quarter session records or police records?
Those are catalogued under police records.
Right.
For our particular one. Many might, someone might else, other cancer records might have them under quarter sessions, so it would just be contacting them. But ours, because they were done by the Chief Constable, we've put them under our police records collection.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And now finally we come to Jen. Thank you very much. I'm a big user of the FindMyPast newspapers, and I absolutely love that new kind of tool of being able to search for phrases and exclude phrases. So yeah, I'm going to be going down many rabbit holes in the next few days.
Should have just had you do this talk, Kelly.
So somebody's come up with a really, really good question. What is the copyright law with regards to using newspaper articles on FindMyPast using the clip tool? So people who may perhaps be working professionally for clients and they're kind of screenshotting or clipping an article of the newspaper, where do they stand with regards to copyrights?
Yeah, so the terms and conditions are actually the same no matter how you obtain the article. So if you use the built-in clipping tool, or you download it, or you share it to social media, it doesn't matter what your what use you use. Any use for educational purposes, for family history research, for teaching is all fair use. We ask that you credit both FindMyPast and the archive where it came from, which you can easily find in the information on the website, whether that's the British Library or Reach, one of our partners and a publishing partner, and so forth. So we ask that you credit both, but if you're only going to credit one, credit the original source, please. Any other use, commercial use, we do ask you to obtain permission. Sometimes that permission has to come from just FindMyPast, and sometimes it has to come from the archive as well. So we work directly with our partners to gain permission when those queries come to us. So the easiest way to do that is to just email us at support@findmypast.com and tell us, this is what I want to do. I'm writing a book, or I'm getting ready to teach a series of presentations or webinars that I'm going to actually have people pay to access, right? Something you're selling as a course. That is considered professional use, and we do ask you to obtain permission. I have yet to see anybody really denied. Although there was one person who wanted to just do an entire book of just newspaper clippings and no actual text, and that we said no to. But other than that, fair use applies in terms of educational use and personal use. So if any of that's unclear, read through our terms and conditions. It's very clearly on the website.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and I can actually say, as an example, I've contacted FindMyPast for use of a newspaper clipping in a talk that I was going to be presenting, and they said, yes, that's fine, but can you please get permission from the British Library too? And the British Library came back and said, yes, that's absolutely fine. So it's a really, really easy, smooth process, and everybody was really kind and supportive and very prompt in replying. So yeah, it's really easy to obtain permission, but do always ask.
I would add too that sometimes if the project is particularly aligned with what FindMyPast is doing, or if it's a women's history something, we might actually promote it for you as well. So keep that in mind. That's one benefit of actually reaching out to us.
Great. Thank you very much for that. So I was really organised, and I had all of these questions lined up for the correct speakers, but we have just had a couple more come through. Have we got time for that, Cheryl?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been really valuable.
Yeah.
If you are they for particular people, or are you just going to throw them out there?
I think I'm just going to throw them out there because I can't see that they've actually been tagged to anybody.
Okay.
So I'll
just presenters, if you think you've got an answer, will you do the raise hand button so we can see? I think it still works when you're on spotlight rather than everybody shout at once. Go for it, Kelly.
Thank you. So somebody has been told that fortune telling was one of our family's survival trades. and they are really interested in finding out more about Romany fortune telling in general. Any suggestions of where to go? So I'm guessing that might potentially be an answer that could answer that. Yep. No.
No, sure.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
You could try, and actually the World's Fair may have, and that's why I've mentioned that it has advertising on it, because I wonder how much might be for for selling trinkets, for selling chairs, brushes, wherever, and maybe even for fortune telling. I think it will be a laborious thing to do, but not impossible to search for it. And it might also, we've got big collections on magic, and there is a link between fortune telling and magic as well. So it won't be an easy one, but I don't think it's impossible either if you've got a lot of time and a lot of patience.
Great, thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything to add about learning more about Romany fortune telling? No. Okay, I'll move on to the next question then. So this person lives on the Sussex coast, and they can remember a time when there were a lot of photographers wandering along the promenade looking for customers. Would any of them have been travellers or gypsies? So I'm guessing the person means the photographers. Whether is it likely for travellers to have been photographers?
Oh, sorry, can I say something about that as well? So yeah, it was a profession that kind of was carried out at the fair as well. I don't think necessarily by Romany or gypsies, but it was definitely part of the kind of that transient community, and photography plays such a big role in the 1800s as well in the fair. As a show, but also as offering to take people's photographs. So it became very accessible. So yeah, it's interesting. I've never thought about, who might be carrying out the photographs. The very few instances when I've known of anyone, I don't believe they were of gypsy origin.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just say we've just published 2 directories of traveling photographers on our website under our free records. So if you go to our website, there's a tab at the top that says free records, and you'll find the directories there. They run from 1841 to 1921, and there are some Romanies in there. There are other travellers, and there are fairground people who followed the profession of photography.
Brilliant, that's great. Thank you, Sharon. And I think this might be the last one. I'm interested to know whether particular fair operators were known to use the Runnymede area in the 1930s and 1940s. So were there any big fairground companies specifically known for that area? I'm guessing maybe, I don't know, because they were a transient community, would they be listed in directories, fairground operators? Go ahead, Diane.
I was going to say, I'd start by looking in the World's Fair and actually look and see, kind of running, kind of see what fairs or circuses were regularly, appearing there.
Yes, and I've just actually seen your comment in the chat, Diane, just below that, saying try looking in the World's Fair. Very, very good tip. Thank you very much for that. Brilliant. So one of the participants who mentioned Wiltshire earlier, somebody has found James, I'm guessing that's a surname, in the Wiltshire area. So great, that's really good. And then it's just lots of thanks to everybody. So I'll hand back to Cheryl now, and thank you all very much. It's been a really enjoyable afternoon.
Yes, so yeah, just reiterating that, it's been a brilliant afternoon, lots and lots of different aspects that maybe we haven't thought about before. And you've seen from the comments at the beginning, most people on this talk are actively seeking Gypsy, Romany, Fairground, circus ancestors or for clients. So I think we've got loads and loads of valuable information from that. And just thank you once again. So for those of you attending, I'm going to take them off spotlight in a minute and then ask you to show your thanks in the normal way.